first progress was steady and exciting. He picked up routines quickly, followed schedules, and met concrete goals with ease. You celebrated his wins, manding, tacting, following directions. It felt rewarding to see the data trending up. But now progress has stalled. Every session feels like you're spinning your wheels. The goals in front of you aren't as straightforward. Multi-step directions overwhelm him. When things don't go as planned, he freezes, melts down, and relies on rigid, scripted responses. Transitions are fine as long as everything goes as expected. But the moment something changes, everything starts to fall apart. You've been trying everything to push past this barrier, more reinforcement, more visuals, more task analyses, but nothing seems to stick. You're left wondering if you're missing something. What if over the next 3 months, you could pinpoint exactly where your learner struggles, select the most impactful goals, and use a structured, evidence-based framework to systematically teach flexibility, problem solving, and independence? What if, instead of feeling stuck, you had a clear step-by-step process to break through the executive functioning barrier and help your learner move toward true independence? That's exactly what this training is going to give you. Let's go back to Liam. You've worked hard to teach him routines, reduce target behaviors, and engage in structured learning tasks. He can follow a schedule, complete discrete trials, and respond to familiar prompts. But what happens when that schedule changes? When the task isn't scripted? When there's no clear prompt telling him what to do next? That's where executive functioning skills come in. Executive functioning is what allows us to think, plan, and do. It takes in information, organize it, make decisions, and adjust when things don't go as expected. It's the difference between following a schedule and creating one, between answering a question and knowing what question to ask. Executive dysfunction is common in autistic individuals and strongly linked to challenges with flexibility, problem solving, and self-regulation, according to Ozanoff and Shetter, 2007. Executive function deficits aren't just an academic challenge. They affect everything. The child who melts down when their preferred seat is taken, that's cognitive flexibility or the lack of it. The learner who stares blankly when given a multi-step instruction, that's working memory breaking down. The teenager who impulsively blurts out answers before thinking, that's inhibitory control. It's a key component of self-regulation. These are the skills that make true independence possible, and yet they're rarely taught explicitly. In ABA, we're great at discrete skills, teaching a child to point to red, to demand for a break, to match objects to pictures. But executive functioning skills aren't discrete, they're dynamic. They change with context. That's why traditional reinforcement schedules and task analyses don't always work the way we expect. So what are we going to do about it? Instead of just reacting to breakdowns, teaching compliance and reducing problem behavior, we need a systematic approach to assessing, prioritizing, and teaching executive functioning skills, just like any other behavior. And that's exactly what we're going to do next. Now that we understand why executive functioning is the missing link, let's talk about what you're going to walk away with from this training. By the end of this course, you're going to be able to describe the key components of executive functioning and how they shape learning and daily life. We're going to recognize common signs of executive functioning deficits and understand why they might be the reason your client's progress has stalled. You're going to utilize evidence-based assessment tools and data collection strategies to pinpoint exactly where your learner struggles, and you're going to develop and implement individualized practical plans to teach executive functioning skills in a way that actually sticks, helping your clients move toward true independence and long-term success. We're not just talking about theory here. This course is designed to give you a step-by-step process, one that you can take and apply immediately with your learners. but I'm getting ahead of myself. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Amelia Dolphins. I am a BCBA and co-founder of Master ABA. I co-founded Master ABA with my twin sister, Diana Kelly. Through Master ABA, we help BCBAs gain confidence in their skills so they can have a greater impact with their learners. Our focus is on ethical, compassionate, learner-centered practices. This course is eligible for CEUs. You must watch the video all the way to the end. There will be a short quiz and survey at the end of the course in the Mission Accomplished lesson. You must complete the required questions in this form to receive your CEU certificate. The survey questions aren't required, but we appreciate your feedback because this helps us improve the courses that we're offering. Your certificate will be emailed to you, although you should receive the certificate immediately. Please allow up to 3 days. If you don't receive your certificate, please check your spam folder before contacting us. If for some reason you miss a step or have any trouble with your certificate, email us at support@masteraba.com. We're happy to help with anything you need. Please pay attention to the 3 code words embedded within this training. You will need to enter these in the quiz to receive your certificate. When I first met Liam, he was 4 years old, bright, curious, and determined. He loved puzzles, could recite facts about his favorite animals, and had an infectious excitement for music. Over the next 2 years, we saw incredible progress. He mastered early language skills, followed structured routines, and his most challenging behaviors nearly disappeared. The VB map and ABLES confirmed what we already knew. He was thriving. Every assessment showed growth. Every session ended with a small victory, and we began talking about discharge. Then first grade happened, and everything changed. Suddenly, the predictable structure he had mastered in services wasn't enough. The general education classroom was chaotic, unpredictable, and demanding in ways that we hadn't prepared him for. Liam froze when given multiple step directions, completing only the first or the last step, unable to fill in the gaps himself. He shut down and had a meltdown whenever things didn't go as planned. The skills that once came so easily seemed to disappear in real-world settings. His mother recounted a particularly tough day at school. His teacher sent an email to his mother that said, "Liam refused to go to the assembly today. The moment I told the class that we'd be going to the assembly instead of music, he started crying and ran to the book corner. He wouldn't move. I had to call the school BCBA. I felt a pit in my stomach. I had done everything I was trained to do. I followed the standard assessments, checked off the skills, built a structured systematic program for him, and yet Liam wasn't prepared for real-world challenges. I sat with that feeling for a while, the feeling that despite everything, I had missed something critical. Then I remembered a book written by one of my past supervisors called Smart But Scattered. I had read it before, but in that moment, it hit me differently. I started looking back at Liam's programming, dissecting the choices I had made, and that's when I saw it. I had taught him to follow routines, but not to navigate change. I had taught him to complete tasks, but not to problem solve when he got stuck. I had taught him to regulate his emotions when things were predictable, but I hadn't given him the tools to handle the unexpected. These were executive functioning skills, skills that weren't explicitly outlined in the VB map, ABLES, or any of the standard assessments that we rely on, but they are critical to real-world success. And I knew then that if we truly want to prepare our clients for independence, we need to do more than teach skills in structured settings. We need to go beyond the standard assessments. We need to systematically teach executive functioning skills, embedding them into real-world situations so that kids like Liam don't just thrive in services, they thrive in life. At first, teaching early skills can feel like solving a straightforward puzzle. Children learn to tact, follow single-step directions, and even engage in complex interverbals. Reinforcement is clear and success is measurable. But executive functioning skills require a different kind of learning, one that isn't just about rote memorization or responding to discrete cues. Executive functioning skills are complex, multi-layered, and dependent on context. A child can learn to follow a schedule, but can they adjust when that schedule changes? They may follow adult directions, but can they generate their own plan when faced with an unexpected problem? These are the skills that separate structured learning from real-world independence. If you haven't been teaching executive functioning skills, you're not alone. Early intervention services focus on concrete skills, observable, teachable behaviors that are easy to measure. Executive functioning skills, however, require abstract thinking, problem solving, and self-regulation, which are harder to teach systematically and significantly harder to measure. Traditional ABA programs target reduction and structured learning, but don't always incorporate skills that foster independence in a natural environment. Many children excel while they are in services, but struggle when those skills are needed in a dynamic, unpredictable environment. Generally, our recommendations is to increase the structure and predictability in the environment, but it's helpful if these kids develop some of the executive functioning skills to handle those times when things are not predictable. Before we go on, I want to make sure you have your first code word, and that code word is going to be abstract. Make sure to write this down because you're going to need it for the quiz to earn your certificate. So one more time, that first code word is abstract. Without explicit teaching of executive functioning skills, many children may struggle to adapt to changes in routine, have difficulty following multi-step directions, exhibit heightened frustration when faced with novel tasks, and rely heavily on adult prompting rather than developing problem-solving abilities. Recognizing this gap is the first step towards addressing it. Executive functioning is like the brain's control center. These are the skills we use to plan, focus, remember, regulate emotions, and adapt to change. They're not just academic skills, they're the true life skills. When executive functioning is strong, things flow. You can set a goal, figure out the steps to get there, and adjust when things don't go as planned. But when these skills are weak, everything feels harder. Tasks take longer, emotions take over, and life becomes one big frustration. So let's break this down. What are these skills and why do they matter so much to our clients? There are three main executive functions: working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibition control. These skills begin to develop in infancy and they continue to evolve as we get older. They impact the way you as a clinician manage your daily tasks and responses to situations that arise throughout your day. Each of these can be broken down into a list of skills that can be taught. We're going to talk about only 7 of these skills today, but I'm going to provide you with a list of other skills in the resources section for you to download. Let's start with inhibitory control, the ability to pause and think before reacting. This skill helps us resist impulsive actions and make thoughtful decisions. Without it, emotions take over and behaviors often happen before the person even realizes it. Think about a child who blurts out answers in class or grabs a toy from their sibling. It's not that they don't know the rules, they just can't stop themselves in that moment. When inhibitory control is weak, you'll see challenges like impulsive behavior, such as grabbing, interrupting, or acting without thinking. You'll see difficulty following rules, so even when the child does understand what those rules are. We're not talking about a language barrier. We're talking about challenges with impulse control. And you're going to see emotional outbursts. You're going to see responding impulsively to frustration or disappointment. This skill is foundational in self-regulation and social interactions. Without it, kids struggle to navigate group settings and maintain relationships. Next is working memory, the ability to hold and use information in the moment. This skill is what allows us to follow multi-step directions, solve problems, and keep track of important details. Without it, even simple tasks can feel very overwhelming. Imagine a child is told, put your shoes on, grab your backpack, and meet me at the door. This is a really common instruction that parents give to their kids, but they only put their shoes on and then they just stand there unsure of what to do next. Often we might see this as noncompliance or a child being uncooperative, but when working memory is weak, you're going to notice issues like difficulty following instructions. They might only complete part of the task or forget key steps. You're going to see struggles with problem solving. They can't hold all of the pieces of a problem in their mind to work through to find a solution. And you're going to see frequent mistakes, forgetting important details like writing their name on a worksheet or remembering their homework. Working memory is critical for learning and independence. Without it, even simple routines can fall apart. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to adapt to change and think about things in a new way. This skill is what helps us problem solve, handle transitions, and navigate unexpected situations. Without it, even small changes can feel catastrophic. Imagine one day a child's class has an assembly instead of art. When the teacher announces the change, the child begins screaming, crying, and refusing to leave. Or in Liam's case, the assembly happened instead of music class, which was something that was important to him. And the problem is that when cognitive flexibility is weak, you're going to see challenges with difficulties with transitions. They're going to start to shift. They're going to struggle to shift between tasks and activities. You're going to see rigid thinking, insisting that things must be done in a certain way. And you'll see emotional dysregulation, meltdowns when routines or expectations change. You'll often hear, that's not fair, or that's not the way it's supposed to be. This skill is essential for resilience and adaptability. Without it, kids get stuck in rigid patterns and limit their ability to cope with life's unpredictability. Planning and organization allows us to set goals, figure out steps, and stay on track. These skills help us manage time, materials, and tasks. Without them, completing even basic activities can feel impossible. Think about a student who has a big project due in a week. Instead of breaking it into manageable steps, they procrastinate until the night before and then they panic. They're not even sure where to start. When planning and organization are weak, you're going to see challenges like procrastination, avoiding tasks because they feel too overwhelming. You're going to see this maybe in some of yourself as well. You're going to see missed deadlines, forgetting important assignments or events, and messy workspaces. You might see them struggling to keep materials or belongings in order. We all know those kids who are experiencing these challenges. We also know other staff who are also experiencing these challenges, and you need to start recognizing that as not a personality trait, but a skill deficit. This skill is key for independent functioning, especially in school and home environments. Without it, kids and teens struggle to manage their responsibilities. Task initiation is the ability to start a task independently without needing excessive prompting. This skill helps us overcome procrastination and hesitation. Without it, even familiar tasks feel like mountains to climb. Think about a child who is told to go take a bath and get ready for bed. Instead of beginning, they play in the sink or talk to themselves in the mirror, waiting for someone to tell them exactly what to do. When task initiation is weak, we're going to see challenges like procrastination, they'll wait for the last possible moment to get started with a task. They're going to be very prompt dependent. They're going to need those constant reminders to help them remember to begin. And they're going to experience missed opportunities, failing to take that first step, even when they know what to do. So task initiation is critical for self-directed learning. And without it, kids struggle to get anything done independently. Self-monitoring is the ability to evaluate your own performance and make adjustments. This skill helps us recognize mistakes, correct them, and learn from feedback. Without it, progress can stall. A child who has been told to clean their room but leaves it unfinished because they failed to recognize that the task wasn't complete is having a challenge with self-monitoring, not necessarily with compliance or cooperation. It may not be that the child didn't want to follow the adult's directions. It might be that they actually can't recognize that the task hasn't been completed fully. When self-monitoring is weak, you're going to notice frequent errors, mistakes that go unnoticed or uncorrected. They're going to have difficulty learning from feedback. They repeat the same mistakes because they don't recognize that they've made those mistakes. And there's going to be a lack of independence. They rely on others to identify the problems or the mistakes that they've made. This skill is essential for self-improvement and independence. Without it, kids depend heavily on external guidance. The last one we are going to talk about today is emotional regulation. And this is the ability to manage your emotions, recover from setbacks, and cope with stress. This skill helps us stay calm under pressure and avoid being overwhelmed by frustration or disappointment. Think of this example: a child who struggles with a difficult puzzle, instead of asking for help, they might throw the puzzle across the room. They might yell, "I hate puzzles." I'm sure you've all had similar experiences with more than one of your clients. When emotional regulation is weak, you're going to see challenges like meltdowns. There's going to be intense reactions to small frustrations. You're going to see avoidance behaviors. The child might refuse to try tasks that feel difficult or stressful. And they're going to have some difficulty calming themselves down. They might take a long time to recover from setbacks that they experience. This skill is essential in building resilience and managing everyday challenges. Without it, emotions can overshadow learning and growth. Executive functioning skills are the foundation for independence, problem solving, and success in real world. When these skills are weak, it's not just about struggling with a single task. It's about missing the tools needed to navigate life's challenges. We often misinterpret executive functioning deficits as refusal or noncompliance or a child's lack of desire to follow an adult's directions. But you can see now, hopefully, that your clients who are not complying or following adult directions may actually be experiencing executive functioning deficits, and that's really important to consider. At this point, you might be thinking, so why didn't I catch this sooner? Or why didn't I focus on executive functioning from the start? And I want to be very clear on this. If you feel like you weren't fully prepared to assess and teach executive functioning skills, that's because you weren't. If you went through the verified course sequence, you learned the fundamentals of behavior analysis, reinforcement, prompting, skill acquisition, and behavior reduction. You studied text analyses, shaping, chaining, discrete trial teaching, and even naturalistic teaching. But here's the thing. Most BCBA training programs don't explicitly teach you about executive functioning. Sure, you may have learned about self-management or problem solving, but when was the last time a class broke down cognitive flexibility or working memory deficits and how to teach those systematically? But don't they directly impact the learner's behaviors? You were given the tools to teach observable behaviors, but many executive functioning skills are internal processes, things that happen inside the learner's mind. And without explicit training in how to assess and shape those skills, it makes sense that they weren't your primary focus. If you rely on the VB-MAP, ABLS, or Vineland to guide your intervention planning, here's the challenge. These assessments do a fantastic job of identifying gaps in language, social skills, and daily living, but they don't comprehensively assess executive functioning. For example, the VB-MAP might tell you that a learner can transition with one prompt, but it won't tell you that if they can problem solve when they encounter a challenge during that transition. The ABLS might show that a learner can complete basic tasks, but it won't reveal whether they can plan and execute a multi-step project independently. So if your learner struggles with executive functioning, it's not because you ignored it, it's because you weren't given the right tools to assess it in the first place. Even if you wanted to dive deeper into executive functioning, you might have run into another problem. Most of the available research and literature on executive functioning isn't written from a behavior analytic perspective. If you've ever read a book or article on executive functioning, you might have noticed that a lot of the research comes from education, psychology, and neuroscience, not ABA. Many recommended interventions focus on cognitive strategies rather than observable, measurable behaviors. There's no standardized ABA protocol for teaching executive functioning skills. So if you've struggled to figure out how to incorporate executive functioning training into your ABA programs, it's because the field hasn't provided a clear roadmap, but that's what we're going to do today. Now that we understand why executive functioning matters and why it's often overlooked in ABA, the big question is, what are we going to do about it? If you've ever felt stuck trying to teach problem solving, flexibility, or independence, here's the good news. Executive functioning can be taught just like any other behavior, but here's the key. We can't just rely on reinforcement and repetition alone, because executive functioning skills are abstract and dynamic. We need a structured step-by-step process to assess, teach, and generalize those skills. That's where this framework comes in. We're going to walk through a 5-step process that will help you systematically assess, prioritize, and teach executive functioning skills in a way that actually sticks. So step 1 is to assess executive functioning skills. Before we can teach executive functioning skills, we need to understand where the breakdown is happening. And in this step, you're going to, we'll discuss how to identify executive functioning deficits, which assessment tools you can use, and how to collect meaningful data. In step 2, you identify and prioritize goals that have the greatest impact for your learner. Not all executive functioning deficits need to be addressed at once. In fact, you really just can't address everything all at once and be successful. Some have a bigger impact on daily functioning than others. And in this step, we're going to talk about how to determine which executive functioning deficits are actually holding your learner back, how to prioritize skills that will lead to the biggest functional gains, and how to set clear, measurable goals for executive functioning skill development that meet medical necessity criteria so you can include those in your treatment plans. In step 3, we're going to break executive functioning skills down into teachable behaviors. Many executive functioning skills like problem solving, flexibility, and working memory feel too abstract to teach directly. That's why in this step, we're going to focus on how to break complex executive functioning skills into discrete teachable behaviors, how to use task analyses and shaping to build these skills, and how to design clear teaching targets. In step 4, you embed executive functioning skills into naturalistic teaching and reinforcement systems. Because executive functioning is context dependent, teaching it in isolation won't lead to generalization. And in this step, we're going to cover how to embed executive functioning skills into real world activities, how to use incidental teaching to strengthen these skills, and how to create reinforcement systems that promote flexible thinking and problem solving. And finally, in step 5, you develop a plan for generalization and maintenance. For executive functioning skills to truly stick, they need to be used across settings with different people and in everyday life. In this step, we're going to focus on how to ensure executive functioning skills transfer beyond ABA services, how to involve parents, teachers, and caregivers in this process, and how to use naturally occurring supports to promote independence. That's a lot, and I'm going to move pretty quickly through a lot of this information, but feel free to reach out to me if you have questions or if anything feels confusing to you. Before we can teach executive functioning skills, we need to understand exactly where the breakdown is happening. Think about it. If a learner is struggling to follow multi-step directions, is it because they have poor working memory, or is it because they can't plan and organize the steps in their mind? Or maybe they shut down emotionally when a task feels overwhelming. If we don't assess the root cause of the problem, we might waste time addressing the wrong thing, and no amount of reinforcement is going to fix this problem that if we haven't identified it correctly. That's why step 1 in this framework is all about pinpointing executive functioning deficits using structured assessments and direct observations. Most BCBAs rely on assessments like the VB-MAP, ABLS, or Vineland to guide their intervention planning. These assessments are fantastic for evaluating language, social skills, and adaptive behavior. But here's the problem: the VB-MAP will tell you if a child can follow simple instructions, but it's not going to tell you if they can adjust when those instructions change. The ABLS will assess whether a learner can match, sort, or sequence, but it won't assess whether they can problem solve when they make a mistake. The Vineland will tell you if a child brushes their teeth daily, but it won't tell you if they remember to bring their toothbrush when they're packing for a trip. And you see the pattern here. The assessments most of us use tell us what a child can do in structured settings, but they don't always capture how well they adapt, plan, and problem solve in real world situations. That's why we need to take an executive functioning lens to assessment, so we can understand not just what a child can do, but how they think and respond when things are when they get more complex. When assessing executive functioning, we want to evaluate inhibitory control. Can the learner stop and think before acting, or do they impulsively blurt, grab, or interrupt? For working memory, we're going to ask questions like, can they hold and use information in their mind, or do they forget multi-step instructions and need constant reminders? When looking at cognitive flexibility, we'll ask questions like, can they adapt when something changes, or do they freeze, melt down, or insist on that things must stay the same? For planning and organization, we look at, can they plan a task and complete it independently, or do they struggle to start and get lost in the process? For task initiation, you're going to ask, can they begin a task on their own, or do they stare at the paper waiting for a prompt? For self-monitoring, you need to look at, can they recognize and correct mistakes that they make, or do they make errors and just move on without noticing? And finally, for emotional regulation, can they handle frustration and setbacks, or do they give up, shut down, or react with intense emotions? Once we know which of these areas are weakest, we can start to design the plan to strengthen them. While most assessments commonly used in ABA don't directly measure executive functioning skills, there are several standardized tools that can help. The Behavior Rating Inventory of Executive Functioning, or BRIEF 2, is a questionnaire for parents and teachers that assess executive functioning skills in daily life. The Dellis Kaplan Executive Functioning System, D-KFS, KEFS, it's a set of tasks designed to measure cognitive flexibility, problem solving, and planning. And finally, the Comprehensive Executive Function Inventory, or CEFI, is a tool that assesses executive strengths and weaknesses across multiple areas. So I'm going to link to all of those resources. They're all paid resources. You don't necessarily need to use a structured assessment to evaluate executive functioning deficits, but if you find yourself needing to assess these skills regularly, I do recommend choosing one of these tools to help guide your assessments. So here's an example. If a child's parent reports that they melt down when routines change, try a rating scale like the brief 2, because this can quantify how often and in what context that happens. The brief 2 and the CEFI are questionnaires that take only a few minutes for parents to complete. The D-KEFS is a more in-depth assessment that involves specific tests to measure executive functioning skills. This assessment requires some additional training to administer and evaluate, and is significantly more of an investment than the other 2 assessments. These tools are useful and could be a valuable addition to your assessment library. But if you aren't in a position to add another standard assessment, there are ways to assess executive functioning skills without using these structured assessments. One of the most powerful ways to assess executive functioning skills is through direct observation in natural settings, classrooms, home, and ABA sessions, as well as community outings, especially places where the child's going to encounter things that are unpredictable and in situations that are less structured. Unlike structured assessments, naturalistic observations allow us to see executive functioning deficits impacting real life functioning. But to make these observations useful, we need a structured approach. Before you start observing, think about the most common challenges your learner is experiencing. Ask yourself, what real world situations seem hardest for them? Where do they seem to get stuck? And what behaviors are interfering with their success? Here's an example. A teacher reports that a student struggles to follow multi-step directions in class. That tells us to observe how they manage instructions, transitions, and working memory demands. Here's a different example. A parent might say that a child melts down when routines change. That tells us to observe how they react when unexpected changes occur. These observations should focus on behaviors that actually interfere with independence, learning, and participation in everyday activities. Rather than just taking general notes, use structured observation methods to collect useful, measurable data. One way is to use ABC data with an executive functioning focus. Traditional ABC data sheets can be adapted to focus on executive functioning related behaviors. So here's an example of a working memory deficit. The antecedent is the teacher gives three-step instruction. The behavior, the learner completes just the first step, but forgets the rest. And the consequence might be that the teacher repeats the instruction and the learner might require ongoing prompting. Here's another example. This one is of inhibitory control deficits. The antecedent might be that the peer takes a turn in a game. The behavior might be the learner grabbing the game piece out of turn, and the consequence might be the teacher intervenes and the learner is struggling to wait for his turn. ABC data helps identify patterns, so we can identify, are they struggling with memory, flexibility, or impulse control? The ABC data helps us understand the context of the challenges that are coming up. Rate, duration, or frequency data helps us prioritize the skills by painting a picture of how often the challenges impact the learner's functioning. Here's an example of a task initiation deficit. How many times does the learner need a prompt before actually starting a task? Another example might be self-monitoring deficits. How often does the learner recognize and correct their own mistakes? You need the data to understand how big of a problem these deficits are having for your learner specifically. For skills that are hard to quantify, try a simple 1 to 5 rating scale like the one pictured here. Here's an example. If a student scores a 1 on adjusts to changes in routines, we know that cognitive flexibility is likely to be one of our main priorities. This table or a similar table is actually in your workbook, so you don't need to take notes. It's all available for you. You can also download the PDF of the slides, so they're available to take notes as well. Since executive functioning deficits don't always show up in structured ABA sessions, getting input from parents and teachers is critical. You can ask questions like, what happens when your child is given long or multi-step directions? You probably see this in services, but it's likely that the child is going to be responding differently at home. How does your child respond when a routine suddenly changes? And does your child remember important things on their own, or do they need constant reminders? If a teacher reports that a student never starts their work without direct prompting, we know to assess task initiation more closely. Once you have the data, you need to connect behaviors to the right executive functioning deficit so you can target the intervention effectively. Review the collected data, the frequency counts, the ABC data, and your rating scales. Then you're going to look for patterns in the data. Are these recurring breakdowns in memory, flexibility, or impulse control? And then you determine which executive functioning deficits are actually causing the most interference. This is going to help you prioritize the intervention targets in step 2. Here's an example. If a learner always struggles with transitions but follows instructions well, we can determine that the issue is probably cognitive flexibility and not necessarily working memory. Another example, if a student initiates tasks but abandons them halfway through, we can pinpoint a deficit in persistence and planning rather than task initiation. After we've pinpointed where the breakdown is happening, we can move to step 2, identifying and prioritizing goals. So we focus on setting goals that will have the biggest impact on the learner's progress. Now that we've assessed executive functioning skills, the next step is to figure out which ones to prioritize. Because let's be honest, we can't target everything at once, even though we want to. Some executive functioning skills impact daily functioning more than others. Some skills lay the foundation for learning other executive functioning abilities, and some challenges are causing more distress or interfering with progress right now. So how do we decide where to start? This step is about strategically prioritizing executive functioning goals, so we focus on what will make the biggest difference for our learners. Research consistently shows that not all executive functioning deficits are equally disruptive. Studies by Diamond 2013 and Zalazzo et al. 2016 highlight that inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility, and working memory are the 3 core executive functioning skills that lay the groundwork for higher level functions like planning and self-monitoring. Dawson and Guare 2011 emphasized that targeting foundational executive functioning skills first, such as self-regulation and flexibility, leads to greater long-term independence than working on isolated, less impactful skills. And Kenworth et al. 2008 found that weak flexibility and poor problem-solving skills were the strongest predictors of academic and social challenges in autistic individuals. So instead of just checking off goals from an assessment list, we need to prioritize executive functioning skills in a way that maximizes success for your individual learners. First, you need to identify the most functionally significant executive functioning deficits for your individual learner. Some executive functioning deficits are frustrating but not urgent, while others are actively preventing meaningful progress. So ask yourself, which executive functioning deficits are creating the biggest barriers right now? Which ones interfere with learning, independence, or social participation? And which skills, if improved, would have the biggest impact on the learner's daily life? Here's an example. We're going to go back to Liam, the child we talked about earlier. His VB-MAP and ABLE scores were strong. He could follow a schedule, complete structured tasks, respond to simple instructions, but when he transitioned to first grade, suddenly things fell apart. He melted down when routines changed. He struggled with multi-step instructions, and he froze when he encountered a new, unfamiliar task. If we look at his executive functioning profile, we're going to see that his cognitive flexibility is weak. He can't adjust to those changes that are happening. His working memory is weak. He forgets multi-step instructions. Task initiation is weak. He waits for the adult to provide him with prompts. Which of these should we target first? I'm going to say probably cognitive flexibility. And this is the reason why. Because this is the root issue that's leading to the most distress. Once we improve flexibility, Liam will be better able to handle unpredictability and transitions, which will reduce emotional outbursts and improve overall participation in class. When prioritizing executive functioning goals, always start with what's causing the biggest functional problems in real life. Next, look at the keystone executive functioning skills. Some executive functioning skills act as sort of a keystone, meaning that improving them automatically improves other abilities. Think of inhibitory control is one of those keystone skills. Diamond and Lee 2011 found that strengthening impulse control improves self-regulation, turn-taking, and social interactions. Cognitive flexibility is another of those keystone skills. Kenworth et al. 2008 found that improving flexibility helps learners adapt to changes, problem solve, and generalize skills. And finally, working memory is another one of those keystone skills. Gothercole and Alloway 2007 found that strengthening memory improves multi-step problem solving, sequencing, and task independence. Let's pause here to make sure you have your next code word. That code word is going to be keystone. Make sure you write this down. You're going to need it for the quiz. Again, that second code word is keystone. Here's another example. Sam struggled with transitions. Sam is a 7-year-old autistic learner who melts down when asked to stop playing and go to the next activity. He becomes rigid and insists it's not time yet. He needs verbal warnings, timers, and prompting for every transition. At first glance, we might think he might need more reinforcement for transitioning, but he has some important supports in place. But if we analyze further, we're going to realize that the root problem is cognitive flexibility, not just transitioning. If we only teach transition routines, we're addressing the symptom, but not the cause of the problem. If we strengthen cognitive flexibility, Sam's going to be able to handle all of the changes that happen much better, not just transitions. Focus on executive functioning goals that unlock broader skills rather than treating isolated challenges. Finally, prioritize goals that promote independence. Ask which executive functioning skills will help the learner function more independently with fewer prompts. Research from Baum et al. 2008 shows that planning, task initiation, and self-monitoring are among the strongest predictors of independent living skills. Noah is 6 years old and has made great progress in his ABA program. He can follow a single step instruction, participate in structured activities with clear expectations, and engage in turn-taking games with prompting. But his teacher reports that Noah struggles with multi-step directions. When Noah is given a 3-step instruction, such as put your lunchbox away, wash your hands, and sit on the carpet, he only completes the first or last step, missing all of the others. If he's asked to do something that's outside of his typical routine, he freezes and needs prompting to continue. At home, his parents say he forgets everything unless we tell him step by step. At first glance, we might think he needs more practice and a structured reinforcement system for completing these multi-step tasks. But if we analyze further, we might realize that the root problem might be his working memory, not just following directions. If we only teach following multi-step directions in one setting or during structured teaching sessions, he might improve within structured ABA sessions, but he's not likely to be able to use the skill in the classroom or at home. So I have seen many times when BCBs have created these structured 3-step direction programs where they put in 3 specific directions and they do it in a very discrete trial format. And you can see now, hopefully, that those types of programs aren't actually addressing the root cause of the problem. It just teaches him rotely to complete those specific 3-step directions. Instead, if we focus on strengthening working memory in real-world situations, Noah will be able to hold multiple steps in his mind, learn to self-prompt when completing instructions, and improve problem-solving skills when he forgets a step. So instead of setting goals like Noah will follow 3-step instructions with 80% accuracy, a better goal might be that Noah will use a visual or verbal self-prompting strategy, such as repeating the steps aloud, pointing to a visual schedule, to complete 3-step instructions across settings. By targeting working memory, we're addressing the root cause, which will help Noah improve in multiple areas, not just following instructions, but also sequencing, planning, and independent task completion. Always prioritize foundational executive functioning skills that will help the child across multiple areas of development and not just in isolated situations. By now, you've done a lot of the hard work of assessing your learners' executive functioning skills and identifying which deficits are most impactful. But here's where a lot of people get stuck. How do we actually teach these skills? How do we take something that's abstract, such as cognitive flexibility, and turn it into something that's more concrete and measurable? This step is all about translating executive functioning skills into teachable behaviors, ones we can observe, measure, and systematically teach. If we don't do this, executive functioning goals stay too vague and too broad to track progress effectively. Let's go through each of the 7 core executive functioning skills and break them into specific teachable behaviors. Think of inhibitory control as the brain's pause button. This skill helps children to stop and think before acting, whether that means waiting for a turn, resisting the urge to blurt out an answer, or managing frustration without an immediate outburst. When inhibitory control is weak, we see things like grabbing items from peers instead of waiting, interrupting conversations frequently, and rushing through activities without stopping to check your work. So instead of writing a vague goal like improve self-control, we need to define exactly what that looks like. So observable, teachable behaviors for inhibitory control might include stops and action when given a pause or wait cue, raises a hand before speaking in a group, waits for a turn in a game or activity, uses a learned coping strategy such as deep breaths, squeezing hands instead of impulsive behaviors, delays gratification when a preferred item is not immediately available. Once we identify these behaviors, we can create a structured plan to systematically teach and reinforce them. Working memory is the ability to hold and use information in the mind. It's what helps a child remember multi-step directions, keep track of information while completing a task, or recall what they were supposed to do after getting distracted. When working memory is weak, we see forgetting multiple step instructions, losing track of materials or steps in an activity, and struggling to follow conversations or remember past events. So instead of saying that we're just going to be improving working memory, we're going to define exactly what that kind of success looks like. So observable, teachable behaviors for working memory might look like repeats back a set of 2 to 3 instructions before completing a task, uses a checklist or visual sequence to complete multi-step activities, holds a conversation by remembering and responding to previous statements, independently recalls and retrieves materials needed for a task, and uses a verbal or visual prompt to stay on track, such as repeating a direction out loud. By teaching strategies like self-prompting and visual supports, we make working memory a skill that can be strengthened over time. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to adjust to new situations, handle changes, and think about things in new ways. When this skill is weak, we're going to see things like meltdowns when routines change, struggles when a preferred activity is unavailable, and difficulty shifting between tasks. So instead of goals directed to increasing flexibility, we're going to get more specific and start to define what flexibility actually looks like. Goals for this might look like response to changes in routine with a learned coping strategy. Chooses a second option when the first choice is unavailable. Accepts feedback or corrections without distress. Transitions from one activity to another without protest. Or engages in open-ended play or conversation without rigid scripting. When we explicitly teach and reinforce flexible thinking strategies, we can help learners handle real-world unpredictability with more ease. Planning and organization skills allow children to set goals, manage their time, and keep track of their materials. When these skills are weak, we see disorganized workspaces and frequently lost items, challenges with completing multi-step projects, and difficulty estimating time and managing tasks independently. Instead of saying improve planning skills, we're going to get a lot more specific again, and we're going to identify what that actually looks like. So these skills might look like uses a visual schedule to prepare for the day's task, gathers all materials before starting an activity, breaks a larger task into smaller steps before beginning, uses a timer or checklist to stay on track, or cleans up materials and puts them away in a designated place. By introducing structure and self-monitoring strategies, we're going to help children develop habits that support their long-term independence. Task initiation is the ability to start a task independently without excessive prompting. When this task is weak, we see staring at a worksheet rather than beginning to complete it, requiring multiple reminders to start an assignment, or avoiding tasks they find difficult or uninteresting. So let's take a look at what specific goals might look like for task initiation. They might look like begins assigned task within 30 seconds of receiving instructions, independently asks for help if unsure how to start, uses a structured routine to transition into work mode, such as gathering all of the materials that they need first, uses a timer or countdown to begin tasks without hesitation, and then completes the first step of an assignment without any external prompting. By teaching these self-starting routines, we can help children overcome that task avoidance and the hesitation to get tasks started. Self-monitoring is the ability to evaluate one's own work and behavior. When this skill is weak, we see completing a task incorrectly but not realizing it, forgetting to check work before turning it in, and difficulty recognizing when they need help. So measurable, observable goals for self-monitoring might look like checks work before turning it in, notices and corrects mistakes independently, uses a checklist or self-review strategy before completing a task, asks for feedback when they're unsure about a task, and reflects on their behavior and makes adjustments when needed. Teaching self-checking and reflection strategies gives children greater independence and the confidence in their work so that they can be more successful. Emotional regulation is the ability to manage frustration and recover from setbacks. When this skill is weak, we're going to see things like meltdowns when things go wrong, giving up when a task feels too difficult, and struggling to stay calm in frustrating situations. Instead of having general goals for emotional regulation, we're going to, again, look at what does self-regulation actually look like. It might look like using a self-calming strategy when they're upset, recovering from frustration within a set period of time, naming emotions and expressions and expressing them appropriately, accepting small challenges without giving up, or using deep breathing or sensory strategies to manage stress. By teaching coping and self-regulation strategies, we help children develop emotional resilience. So you've assessed your learners, you've prioritized the most impactful executive functioning skills, and you've broken them down into clear, teachable behaviors. Now comes the fun part, actually teaching them in a way that sticks. We know that children learn best through play and real-world interactions. Skills taught in isolation often don't generalize well, and the best learning happens when children are actively engaged and motivated. Research shows that play-based learning leads to deeper skill acquisition and generalization, and that's a study by Lillard et al. 2013. When executive functioning skills are embedded in meaningful activities, children are more likely to use them in real-world life. Here's the secret to making this work. We don't just teach executive functioning skills, we're going to create experiences that require kids to practice them. Think about it. You can talk about self-regulation all day, but a child won't actually develop it until they've been in situations where they need to manage frustration, adjust their approach, and receive and recover from disappointment. You can explain problem solving, but kids truly learn it by encountering a challenge, generating a solution, and testing it in real time. We create learning opportunities by engineering moments that naturally demand executive functioning skills through games, pretend play, movement activities, and everyday situations. And you need to make sure that you're doing it in a way that presents a challenge that they can handle, and you're going to gradually shape their ability by making that experience just a little bit more difficult. And the best part is, it doesn't feel like work to them. It feels like play because it is. Wait your turn, be patient, hands to yourself. How many times have you said these phrases in a session? And how many times has the child immediately done the opposite? For many learners, inhibitory control doesn't come naturally. They grab a toy before it's their turn, they pop every bubble before anyone else has a chance, and they rush through an activity without stopping to think. And let's be honest, self-control is hard. It's hard for kids, adults, and everyone in between. I'm sure all of us have had some challenges with this in the past. But instead of just telling children what not to do, we're going to teach them what they should do instead. And the best way to do that is through play. When we think about impulse control, we often picture structured turn-taking games, waiting in line or following rules in a classroom. And while those are great experiences for kids, they're not always fun. The key to teaching inhibitory control is to embed it into high interest, engaging activities where kids have a natural motivation to practice waiting, pausing, and thinking before acting. So we're going to talk about 2 different play-based activities that build impulse control while keeping the kids fully engaged. You can adjust these activities to reflect the interests of your learners. Just adapt them to include whatever is interesting and motivating to your learners. The first activity is, we'll call it Ready, Set, Go. It's a car ramp game. You're sitting on the floor with a child holding a small race car. Next to you, they have a car of their own, and it's positioned at the top of a ramp. Their hands are twitching with excitement, ready to push the car down. But here's a rule. You can only push your car when you hear go. I start with a smile and say, ready, set, go. The child releases their car, laughing as it zooms down the ramp. This is especially fun with really crazy ramps that have loops and do all sorts of crazy things. Then you reset and go again. But this time you're going to pause longer before you say go. You watch their hands, their body. Are they able to hold back that urge to release the car? And if they push the car too soon, it's no big deal. Just say, oops, we have to wait for go. We're going to try that again. With practice, the child learns to pause and control their impulse, and they don't even realize they're working on self-regulation. It's just a game. It's a fun game, and that's what makes it work. Once they've mastered waiting for go, you can add it in a different twist. Now you can mix in fake cues such as ready, set, banana. The child has to wait until they hear go. So they have to resist that urge to push the car down. You might say ready, set, go, 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 but they are supposed to be waiting for just one go. You have to make sure that they understand that that's one of the rules. And you could say ready, set, stop. They must freeze their hands and not resist that urge to push that car down the ramp. And suddenly it's not about waiting for a turn. It's about listening, thinking, and controlling their impulses. Every time they wait correctly, you can celebrate. Wow, you really listened and you waited for go. That was amazing. At first, they might fail a lot, and that's okay. That's the point. But over time, they start to pause, listen, and think before acting. And that skill carries over to other situations. Raising their hand in class, waiting in line, following multi-step directions. As the child gets better, you start fading your support. Instead of saying, oops, let's try again, you simply raise an eyebrow and pause, giving them a chance to self-correct. You also introduce a self-monitoring strategy. You have the child whisper, ready, set, go to themselves before pushing the car. This self-prompting you're going to see is really helpful in teaching all of these skills. This helps them internally regulate their impulses instead of relying on an adult prompt. They are learning to prompt themselves to wait. And before you know it, they're doing it on their own, controlling their impulses without constant reminders. Here's another activity. This is the bubble patience challenge. This one is a fantastic way to teach inhibitory control. So here's how it works. You take out a bubble wand and hold it in front of a small fan. The bubbles float around the child, just waiting to be popped. But here's a rule. You can't pop bubbles until you are given a special cue. You blow the bubbles and say, wait, not yet. Okay, go. And the child lunges forward, laughing as they pop the bubbles. Each time you increase the wait time before you say go. Then, just like with the car ramp game, you can add fake cues to make it harder. Wait, banana. Wait, go, go, go. Or wait, freeze. They're having fun, but at the same time, they're learning to control their body and impulses in a real functional way. Just like with the car ramp. Find a way to pull in the learner's special interests and include movement. How can you make building self-control fun? That's the key to making this successful. Both of these activities, the car ramp game and the bubble patience game, teach impulse control in a way that's highly engaging. The kids want to play, so they're motivated to follow the rules. It's naturally reinforcing. You don't need to build in additional fake reinforcement systems. The fun of the game itself rewards self-control. And these are easily generalized. Once they're mastered, these skills carry over into other areas, like waiting in line, following instructions, or resisting interruptions. And that's what makes these activities so powerful. Instead of forcing children to practice self-control, we're embedding it into play, making self-regulation something that they actually enjoy. What did I say? Do you remember what we talked about yesterday? For kids with strong working memory, these aren't difficult questions, but for kids with weak working memory, it's a daily struggle. Imagine trying to bake a cake with a recipe that disappears from your mind the moment you read it. You remember the first step, maybe the last, but everything in the middle, it's just gone. That's what it's like for kids with poor working memory. They start putting their shoes on, but forget they were also supposed to grab their backpack. They listen to a teacher's 3-step instruction, but only complete one part before getting lost. They begin writing a sentence, but forget that what they were going to say by the time they finish the first word. Working memory isn't just about remembering things. It's about holding and using information in real time. So how do you help kids strengthen the skill? We're not going to use flashcards or drills, but you're going to use engaging interactive challenges that push them to hold on to information just a little bit longer. You're going to be using shaping here a lot. So the first activity that I'm going to suggest is a Simon Says game, but it's just a little bit harder. Picture this, you stand in front of a child and say, Simon says, touch your nose. They touch their nose. Okay, no problem. Now you step it up. Simon says to touch your nose, then spin around. They do both, and so far, so good. But now you push their working memory to the next level. Simon says, clap twice, stomp once, then pat your head. Suddenly, they have to hold multiple pieces of information in their mind, sequence them, and execute them in the right order. At first, they might get 1 or 2 steps right, but forget the last cue, and that's not a problem. You can help them by breaking it down into smaller, manageable steps, encouraging them to repeat the instructions aloud before acting, and giving them a visual reminder, like tapping fingers for each step. Those are really important cues that they can use to improve their working memory for lots of tasks. If you think about it, when you're presented with a task of multiple steps, you might repeat the steps to yourself. If somebody was to recite their phone number and you wanted to remember it, the way you would remember it is by reciting the numbers over and over again in your head until it was locked in. The way you remember somebody's name is to repeat it to yourself. So you need to teach these strategies to the kids very intentionally. And just like that, Simon Says transforms into a powerful working memory workout. You can make it a little bit harder. You can play a mix it up round. Once they've mastered simple sequences, you can take it up a notch. You can add in some distractions by playing music in the background, so it's a little bit harder to focus. You can give the commands out of order and have them put them back in a specific sequence, or you can ask them to whisper the steps to themselves before completing them. You're training their brain to hold, organize, and retrieve information faster and more efficiently. And guess what? The skill carries over into real life. Remembering multi-step classroom directions, following through with bedtime routines, or keeping track of important details in conversations. This is more than a game. It's an exercise for their minds. Another activity that you can use to teach this skill is the what's missing game. Now, what you can do is you can place 5 small objects or whatever number is appropriate for your learner. You might put in a toy unicorn, a small red car, a plastic apple, a tiny little top hat, and a stuffed bear. You say to the child, look carefully, try to remember all 5 things. Then you cover them with a cloth, you quietly remove one of them, and you reveal what's left. Then you ask, what's missing? At first, they might guess randomly, and that's okay. But over time, they start using strategies to help them remember what the objects were. They might say the names of the objects out loud. They might make up a story about the objects, or they could group similar objects together, such as the apple and the bear were food and animals. They're not just playing a memory game. They're learning and holding and recalling information strategically. And when they get better at this game, they'll get better at remembering what they've learned in ABA services, in school, and in daily life. Both of these skills, Simon Says, and what's missing are designed to strengthen working memory in real time, to teach kids to use memory strategies like chunking and repetition, and they make learning fun, so they're going to stay engaged. And the best part, these skills carry over into everyday routines, schoolwork, and communication. By embedding working memory practice into play, we help kids build the cognitive skills they need for success. You wake up one morning, you grab your coffee and start your normal routine, but suddenly nothing is where it should be. Your toothbrush is in the fridge. Your socks are in the silverware drawer. Your car keys, they're just gone. Your brain scrambles to adjust, but you feel frustrated. This isn't how things were supposed to be. Now imagine this is how you feel every time something changes. For kids with poor cognitive flexibility, unexpected challenges do feel overwhelming. If the schedule changes, they might melt down. If their favorite toy is missing, they might refuse to play with anything else. If a game doesn't go the way they expect, they quit or they get upset. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to adapt, problem solve, and shift between ideas. It helps kids navigate change, adjust to new situations, and tolerate uncertainty. So how do we strengthen it? By creating playful experiences where the rules change, plans shift, and they have to think on their feet. We're going to look at 2 different activities that do just that. The first is an animal walk switch. You and the child are in a big open space, ready to move. You say, walk like a bear, and drop to your hands and feet, stomping forward with big, heavy steps. The child follows. Hopefully he's giggling. Just as they get into the rhythm, you suddenly call out, now be a frog. They freeze for a second. Wait, what? But Then they adjust, switching the big bouncy jumps across the floor. Then you shout out, now be a snake. They hesitate again, then slowly start slithering on their belly. Each time they have to let go of what they were just doing and adjust to something new on the spot. At first, some kids will struggle with the switch. They might keep doing the last movement or resist changing at all, and that's okay. That tells us that this is a skill they need to be building. So we can scaffold the challenge. Start with predictable structured changes, such as switching every 10 seconds, and let them know that that change is going to be coming up. Then make it faster and more unexpected. Then let the child call out some of the changes so they experience being flexible in a leadership role. Cognitive flexibility isn't about handling planned changes. It's about learning to shift in the moment when something new happens. This ability trains the brain to adjust quickly, accept new ideas, and keep moving forward. And best of all, it's active. It's fun and it feels like a game, not a structured lesson. Another fun activity for cognitive flexibility, I like to call the wrong way dress up. This is completely different. A child stands in front of you and they're ready to put on some dress up clothes. You hand them a pair of socks, but instead of putting them on their feet, you're going to put them on their hands. The child looks at you confused. It's not right. You smile. Are you sure? Maybe socks go on your hands now. They laugh, but they go along with it. Then you give them a shirt, but try to put it on their legs like pants. Wait a second. Does this look right? Now they have a choice. They can stick with the wrong way or they can figure out what needs to change. Some kids will insist on doing it the right way immediately. Others will go along with the silliness for a little while before realizing, okay, something has to change here because the shirt just is not going on my legs. And that is the cognitive flexibility moment. They have to recognize that something isn't working, adjust their thinking, and try a different way. They have to let go of their first plan and make a new one. Once they adjust to the way to where each item that works, you celebrate. You figured it out. You changed the plan. Remember, this is a lesson in flexibility, not dressing. So they don't have to get the clothes on the right way for you to celebrate. They just have to make some type of adjustment. It's great if they continue to be silly. And the best part, this activity isn't just fun and engaging, it mimics real world challenges where kids need to recognize their mistakes and adjust on the fly. If they can handle wrong way socks and silly shirts, they're better prepared for moments when they have to switch seats in class unexpectedly, or they can't use their favorite blue crayon and need to pick a different color, or if they have to figure out a new way to complete a task when the first idea didn't work out. Cognitive flexibility is about learning to adjust, adapt, and accept change. And this game turns it into something that's playful, interactive, and memorable. You can make this harder, just like with the other games, by adding different challenge rounds. Just like with the animal walk switch, this activity can be made progressively more challenging. Instead of making random mistakes, you might set up hidden patterns. Today, shirts might go on your heads or shoes might go on your hands. The child has to figure out what the pattern is and adjust their choices accordingly. You might, again, let the child lead this activity. They can decide what the wrong way is to put on clothes, and they might challenge you to figure out what needs to change. This requires them to think flexibly while also taking control of their learning experience. Each level pushes them a little bit further, helping them not only tolerate change, but actively embrace and work through unexpected situations. Both of these activities, animal walk, switch, and wrong way dress up, are designed to train the brain to adjust quickly to new situations, encourage problem solving when things don't go as planned, make change feel fun instead of frustrating. And best of all, these activities can be repeated and adapted in so many different ways. Instead of animal walks, try silly sound switch, where kids switch between making different funny noises. Or instead of the dress up game, try backwards snack time, where kids have to figure out what's wrong with a silly eating routine. Maybe you're using a spoon to drink. Maybe you're pretending to put a napkin on your head. The more we play with change, the more comfortable and confident kids become when faced with unexpected challenges in real life. Remember, gradual progression ensures success for all learners. Storytelling keeps it engaging and relatable. Activities are adaptable for different skill levels, settings, and interests, and this provides real-world generalization opportunities. You've probably worked with a child who loses everything: homework, their lunchbox, that one blue crayon they need to finish the picture they're drawing, or a child who stares at their worksheet completely overwhelmed because they don't know where to start. For some kids, planning and organization don't come naturally. Instead of gathering materials before starting a task, they just jump in unprepared. Instead of breaking things down into steps, they freeze because everything feels like too much. Instead of keeping things neat, they shove papers in their backpack and call it a day. Planning and organization helps kids structure their thoughts, manage their materials, and follow through with tasks. And just like any other skill, these abilities can be taught and strengthened through engaging hands-on play. So we're going to, again, look at two different fun, interactive ways to help kids plan ahead and stay organized without it feeling like work. The first one is, I like to call the grocery store planner. You tell the child, we're going to the grocery store. You set up a pretend store using play food, empty boxes, or picture cards. But there's a catch. Before they start shopping, they need a plan. You hand them a small shopping list. Maybe the list includes a picture of apples, milk, and bread. At first, they might just grab random things off the shelf based on what they're most interested in, but you stop them and say, wait, did you check your list? What do you still need? Now they pause, look at their list, and adjust their plan, just like they would in real life. Once they master following a simple shopping list, we can increase the challenge. Maybe you start by having the child follow that 3-item shopping list, but as the child gets better at this game, make it a little bit more challenging, but by categorizing items. The list might then include categories instead of specific items. It might say 1 fruit or 1 dairy item, 1 vegetable, and they have to plan which item to get instead of just copying the list exactly. You might create a meal plan. Instead of giving them a list, you might say, you're making breakfast. What do you need? Now they must create their own plan instead of just following yours. Each level helps kids develop stronger planning, organization skills, moving from following a plan to creating their own. Here's another activity. It's called step-by-step art. It's a completely different way to teach planning, and it uses the child's creativity. So this isn't going to be something that all of our kids are super excited about, but some of them will be. You sit down with the child and hand them a blank piece of paper with some markers, and you might say, draw a house. They grab a marker and start scribbling, but halfway through they realize, oops, they forgot their front door. Now they have to squeeze it into the drawing and things feel messy. So you introduce a new rule. Before you start drawing, you have to plan your steps. You show them a simple plan. First, draw the outline of the house, then add in windows and a door. Last, draw the roof, sun, and any other details that they want to include. Now, instead of jumping straight into the task, they think ahead and their final drawing looks much more complete. You can shape the difficulty of this activity by having the child follow a blueprint, make a more complex plan, or create their own step-by-step plan for a drawing before they create the drawing. Planning isn't just about homework and chores. It applies to everything kids do, even the fun stuff. You say, go put on your shoes. They just stand there. You prompt, okay, go ahead. Still nothing. For some kids, getting started is the hardest part. They stare at a puzzle, but don't pick up the pieces. They sit next to a pile of blocks, but they don't start building. They hear time to clean up, but they don't move. It's not because they don't understand. It's because they don't know how to begin. Some kids need a spark to get them moving. So how can we help them take that first step? And we're going to do that, of course, by making it fun, fast, and engaging. Let's look at 2 ways that we can teach this skill. The first I like to call the mystery bag challenge. For this activity, you sit next to a child and hold up a colorful mystery bag. Ooh, there's something inside, but you can only open it if you're ready to start right away. The child's eyes widen, they reach for the bag, but you stop them. Wait, remember, when you open it, you have to start right away. They nod, barely able to contain their excitement. Then they open the bag and pull it out. Maybe it's a handful of toy animals, or maybe it's a mini puzzle or a silly dress-up hat. Each item comes with an instant action challenge. If they got the animals, you have to make the animals run around the table. If they got the puzzle, you have to start putting the puzzle together. Ready, go. If it's the hat, you have to put it on and do a silly dance. No waiting, no hesitation, just immediate action. At first, some kids pause before reaching in. They're still feeling that hesitation, but over time, they learn to act fast, embrace the unknown, and just get started. This works best when you tie in their special interests. So if you can put something that they're going to be super excited about in the bag at first, that's going to get them really engaged in this activity. When you first introduce this activity, each item has a simple, fun action attached to it. Maybe it's jumping, making an animal sound, or clapping. The focus is just on starting immediately. But to increase the difficulty, give each item maybe a 2-step action. It might be put on the hat and spin in a circle. This helps them initiate and follow through. You can make this even more challenging by giving them a time limit. Before opening the bag, you say you only have 5 seconds to do the action. Ready? Go. This builds speed and confidence in getting started. Finally, you can let the child lead. The child can choose what goes in the bag and sets the challenges for you. This builds self-directed initiation instead of relying on an adult. The goal? To shift them from needing external motivation to taking action on their own. Here's another activity. This is a race to get started. This is an idea to make task initiation a high energy game, and it works best for those kids who respond well to those high energy activities. You stand next to the child and say, I bet I can start faster than you. Their eyes light up. No way. You say, let's see. First one to start picking up toys wins. Before they can think about it, you start moving fast, grabbing toys, exaggerating your excitement, and suddenly they jump in too. So why does this work? Because instead of giving them time to hesitate, you're creating a playful sense of urgency. At first, some kids will watch you for a moment before they start joining in, but that's okay. Each time they'll jump in just a little bit faster. And once they get used to starting right away, we can increase the challenge by creating surprise races or letting the child lead the race. A child is putting together a simple puzzle. They're focused, determined, and working quickly, but there's a problem. One piece is completely upside down. It clearly doesn't fit, but they keep pushing and twisting, trying to force it into place. You ask, does that piece look right? They glance at it, shrug, and say, I don't know. For some kids, self-monitoring is the missing piece. They rush through tasks without checking their work. They make the same mistakes over and over because they don't realize what's wrong. They don't recognize when they need help, so they either guess or they give up. Self-monitoring helps kids pause, evaluate, and adjust. And just like any other skill, we can teach it through play. Let's explore 2 fun activities to teach this skill. The first one is detective work. Imagine telling a child, I need your help. Someone made a mistake and I need a detective to find it. Their eyes widen, they sit up straighter. Suddenly, they're on the case. You hand them a simple worksheet, a coloring page, or a toy that's set up wrong. But there's a twist. You've already made a few mistakes on purpose. A coloring page where the sun is blue, a completed puzzle where 2 pieces are swapped, a set of stacking blocks where the biggest block is on top instead of on the bottom. Something isn't quite right here. Can you find it? They examine the task closely, scanning for mistakes. At first, some kids will miss the errors entirely, but that's okay. You prompt them to slow down and take another look. And once they start spotting the mistakes, you celebrate. You caught it. You're a great detective. Gradually, instead of rushing through their own work, they start building the habit of stopping to check. Here's another activity. Slow motion challenge. Another key part of self-monitoring is slowing down. A lot of our kids rush through the activities. They are in constant motion and going very quickly. So if we can make slowing down a game, then we can address some of those issues. You tell the child, we're going to do something tricky, but you have to do it in slow motion. They look at you confused. Yep, we're going to build this block tower, but you can only move this slow. And you can model dramatically moving your hand at a snail's pace and just going really, really slow. Maybe the child giggles, but they follow along. At first, it's funny, but then something amazing starts to happen. They start placing blocks more carefully. They check their work as they go. They notice when a piece isn't stable before it falls over. And why does this work? Because when kids slow down, they start to notice details that they usually miss. And once they've practiced checking their work in slow motion, we can increase the challenge. We can build in checkpoints where you pause and ask them to check for mistakes. Ask, does this seem right? Gradually increase the speed to a more normal speed, but continue to pause at checkpoints to give them an opportunity to check on their work. You can fade these supports as they begin to pause and check on their own. A child is building a tall tower of blocks. They're focused, excited, proud, then crash. The tower tumbles over, their eyes widen, their hands clench into fists, and in an instant, they have a meltdown. They scream, they shove the blocks away, they refuse to try again. For many kids, this frustration feels huge. If something is too hard, they give up immediately. If a sibling takes their toy, they might explode. If a game doesn't go their way, they just quit. They don't have the tools to pause, manage their emotions, and recover from disappointment. But just like any other skill, we can teach emotional regulation through play. Let's look at 2 different games that we can play that teach kids to manage frustration, recover from setbacks, and build independence. We're going to call this one the feelings freeze. You begin the activity by telling the child, we're going to play a game, but there's a special rule. You have to freeze and act out when I say a feeling. You start out by calling emotions happy, and the child grins and does a happy dance. Angry, they scrunch their face into and make fists. Sad, they pretend to wipe their tears away. Then you add in a twist. Okay, now when I say a feeling, you have to freeze, take a deep breath, then act it out. Now, when you say frustrated, they freeze, take a deep breath, then act out frustrated. At first, some kids forget to freeze, they just react, and that's okay. Just gently remind them. Oops, remember, before you react, take a deep breath first. Each time they practice, they're training their brain to pause before reacting, and this is a key skill in emotional regulation. Make this one a little bit more challenging by adding real life situations. You can make cards for staff to read so they don't have to think of these situations at the spur of the moment. And here are some examples. But make sure to include examples that are actually triggers for your learner. You're playing with blocks and someone knocks them down, freeze. You really want a turn, but you have to wait. Now freeze. The child pauses, breathes, and then chooses a response. Practicing these situations outside of the actual triggering event as part of a game is a great way to introduce this skill. Don't try to push the child into doing this when they are truly upset at first. Include some type of visual cue that will remind the child to freeze before reacting. Let the child pick out what they want to use as a cue. You can use this cue as a reminder when the triggering event comes up, but avoid a lot of verbal prompts or reminders when the child experiences a trigger. These often make the situation worse, not actually better. All right, so another activity for this is the bounce back challenge. In this last activity, you're going to help kids recover from frustration by making it a game. You tell the child, I'm going to give you a little challenge, and if it doesn't go the way you want, your job is to bounce back. Then you create small controlled moments of frustration. Maybe you let them win a round of a game, but then they're going to lose the next round. Tic-tac-toe is a great game for teaching for this type of activity, or even something like memory where you might be able to manipulate the game. You give them a puzzle, but accidentally remove a piece. Or maybe you set up a bowling pins and let them knock some of the pins down, but maybe you stuck one to the floor using tape so it leaves at least one of those pins standing. Each time you cheerfully say, oops, that didn't go your way. What can you do to bounce back? At first, some kids will pout or cross their arms, and that's okay. You can model, I could take a deep breath and try again. Or I could say, that's okay. Slowly, they start choosing their own bounce back strategies. And over time, they recover from frustration faster and with more confidence. Over time, introduce small real world challenges, such as a snack that they want isn't available, or a favorite toy is missing, or a plan might change unexpectedly. Gradually pause to allow the child to bounce back on their own. If they need prompting, provide a visual cue or simple verbal prompt to check in to see if they want to try to bounce back from the situation. Both of these activities are designed to help kids pause before reacting, give them real practical tools for managing frustration, and make emotional regulation a fun, engaging game. And best of all, these strategies translate directly into real world skills. The feeling freeze helps kids slow down and breathe before reacting to strong emotions. And the bounce back challenge encourages kids to recover from setbacks and keep going. By embedding emotional regulation into play, we help kids build resistance, manage frustration, and feel more in control of their emotions. At this point in the framework, you've done a lot. You've assessed executive functioning skills, you've identified and prioritized the most impactful goals, you've broken these abstract skills into teachable behaviors, and you've embedded executive functioning skills, skill building into engaging, naturalistic, play-based activities. But here's the problem. Teaching a skill in a structured environment is one thing. Getting kids to use that skill in the real world across different settings without prompts or support, that's the real challenge. That's where step 5 comes in. You need to develop a plan for generalization and maintenance. This plan is all about helping kids apply the executive functioning skills in different environments with different people and under different conditions, and ensuring they continue using these skills over time, even when we're no longer prompting or reinforcing them. Parent and caregiver involvement is key. Teaching families how to reinforce executive functioning skills at home so the child isn't just using them in ABA services is key to making your generalization and maintenance plan work. Without this step, everything we've done stays stuck inside of ABA services instead of becoming a real lasting change in the child's life. You might have noticed something about executive functioning challenges. They tend to show up most when a child is overwhelmed, stressed, or distracted. A child might practice impulse control beautifully in a structured game, but when they get too excited at a birthday party, they snatch the toy they want instead of waiting for a turn. They might plan a drawing step by step with the RBT, but when given a blank piece of paper at home, they don't know where to start. They might follow multiple step directions in a session, but at the grocery store, they wander off, forget the list, and grab random items. Why? Because real life is unpredictable. To help executive functioning skills generalize, we have to intentionally create opportunities for kids to practice these skills in different ways before expecting that they're going to do them naturally. You promote the generalization of executive functioning skills the same way you do other skills you teach in ABA. You're going to vary the environment. If a child can regulate their emotions in the clinic, can they do it at the playground? If they follow multiple step directions at the table, can they do it at the park or while getting ready for bed? Switch up locations frequently between home, school, and community settings so executive functioning skills don't become situational. You're going to need to change the people who are giving instructions. Have different teachers, parents, siblings, and peers help prompt executive functioning skills instead of just the RBT. This ensures kids don't rely on just one person to cue them. And then you're going to make them more challenging over time. Once a child masters a skill in a structured setting, introduce real world directions. If they can follow multiple step directions at home, try it in a noisy family gathering. If they can plan a simple task, try a more complex one with multiple steps. If they can handle a small frustration, see how they respond to a slightly bigger one. Gradually increase complexity so skills transfer to real world situations. And finally, provide natural consequences instead of direct prompts. Instead of saying, remember to check your work, let them turn in something incomplete and experience a natural consequence of needing to fix it. Instead of reminding them to plan, let them forget the key item on a list and problem solve how to adapt. The key is to let them struggle just enough to recognize the need for the skill on their own without becoming so frustrated that they just want to give up. Once a skill generalizes, we need to make sure it sticks around for the long haul. Without ongoing reinforcement, kids can lose progress and revert to old habits, especially if executive functioning challenges are tied to neurological differences such as autism or ADHD. So here's how to maintain progress without prompting or making it feel like work. You need to build executive functioning skills into daily routines. If a child is working on planning and organization, make packing their backpack each morning a routine. If they're building emotional regulation, check in daily. What was one time you stayed calm today? If they're practicing self-monitoring, ask, what's one thing you fixed before I had to remind you? The goal is to make executive functioning skills a natural, expected part of their day. And then you're going to gradually reinforce these skills less often over time. At first, kids might need frequent praise and reinforcement for using executive functioning skills. But over time, fade the external rewards and shift to natural reinforcement. Instead of earning a sticker or some reinforcement for using their schedule, they experience less stress because they know what to expect. Instead of praise for handling frustration, they get to keep playing because they didn't melt down. Let them feel the benefits of executive functioning skills directly instead of relying always on those external rewards. Use self-monitoring strategies. Once kids have basic self-monitoring skills, increase their independence. Use visual checklists so they can track their own steps. Have them reflect at the end of the day. What's one thing you did really well today? Encourage goal setting. What's something you want to get better at this week? This shifts executive functioning skills from adult-directed to self-directed. Here's the reality. Even if a child masters executive functioning skills while in services, those skills won't truly stick unless they're practiced and reinforced at home. But parents aren't ABA professionals. They're busy. They don't have time to figure out how to add more onto their already full plates. So how do you make this easy for families to support executive functioning skill development? The last thing parents need is one more thing to track, one more thing to practice, one more behavior plan to follow. So instead of giving them more work, we make executive functioning skill building feel effortless by embedding it into what they're already doing. So you teach them that instead of saying you need to practice working, so instead of saying that you need to practice working memory with your child, you're going to say, try giving them 2-step directions at bedtime instead of 1. So they're already giving directions at bedtime, and now they're just going to give them 2-step directions rather than just 1 step at a time. And instead of saying you need to help them work on self-monitoring, just let them know that when they say they're done cleaning up, have them check one more time. So you tell them, go clean up their room. They come and they tell you they're done. The only job the parent has at that moment is just to prompt them to go check one more time. Instead of handing them a behavior plan that they'll never have time to follow, you're going to give them one simple phrase to use in everyday life. So they might say, what's your plan before we start? And this would target planning and organization. They might say, oops, try checking that again. And this is to practice self-monitoring. They might say, let's count to 5 before reacting. And that's to practice impulse control. Parents don't need data sheets and structured activities. They just need small, simple ways to encourage executive functioning skills in daily life. And when it feels easy and natural, they're far more likely to actually do it. Work on building this into the parents' daily habits by giving them just one thing to do. Add only just one. I know it's tempting to address multiple things across the day, but parents will routinely forget. Teach parents simple ways to practice and reinforce executive functioning skills. Instead of them asking, did you have a good day? One of the things that they could ask is, what's one time you used self-control today? Instead of saying, don't grab the toy, the parents could say, Try using your weight strategy. Instead of giving step-by-step instructions, they might let them plan and problem solve on their own. Give parents a one-sentence strategy for the skills that they're focusing on. Parents don't need to memorize all of the complex interventions, but again, choose just one skill for the parent to focus on and provide one simple way to prompt each skill. So they only need to prompt one skill, and that's it. You're just going to work on the parents trying to practice one skill at a time. We've covered a lot in this training. We've explored why executive functioning skills matter, how to assess and prioritize them, and how to teach them in fun, naturalistic ways that actually work. But now I want to help you take a step back and think about how to make this feel doable for you, because I know what you might be thinking right now. This all sounds great, but how do I actually implement it with my caseload? Or what if I don't have time to create elaborate activities for every session? These are real concerns, and the last thing I want is for you to leave this training feeling overwhelmed instead of empowered. So let's simplify it. Let's talk about what really matters and how you can start making an impact right now. When a child struggles with executive functioning, it's easy to see all the things they're not doing well. They can't manage frustration, they forget multiple step directions, and they get stuck when something doesn't go their way. But we're not here to fix every executive functioning skill all at once. Instead, we're here to answer one key question. What's the one thing holding this child back from making progress right now? Is it impulse control? Are they so reactive that they can't engage in a structured learning activity? Is it task initiation? Do they stare at materials but never actually get started? Is it cognitive flexibility? Do they melt down the second something changes? You're going to start there, because when you target the one executive functioning skill that's acting as a roadblock, you unlock progress in so many other areas. If a child learns to control impulses, they can start learning turn taking, waiting, and problem solving. If a child learns to initiate tasks, they can start working on independence, play skills, and academics. If a child learns to adjust to change, they can start thriving in a group setting and managing transitions with less distress. You don't need to tackle everything at once. Just start with what's getting in the way the most. One of the biggest mistakes we make with executive function skill building is thinking it has to be a separate lesson. But the best executive functioning instruction doesn't happen in a structured one-on-one session with a token board and a timer. It happens in the middle of play, routines, and everyday moments. When a child is getting frustrated in the car because you missed a turn, that's a chance to practice cognitive flexibility. When they're at the grocery store and need to follow a simple list, that's an opportunity to work on planning and working memory. When they're building with blocks and everything falls over, that's a perfect time to practice emotional regulation. Instead of setting aside time to work on executive functioning skills, embed them right into what the child is already doing. That way, they're learning executive functioning skills in real life contexts, not just in structured practice drills. At the end of the day, executive functioning is the foundation for everything else we teach. A child who can regulate emotions is better able to learn new skills. One who can follow directions and hold information in their mind is better able to succeed in school. And one who starts independently is better able to develop confidence and independence. Executive functioning skills don't develop overnight. But with consistent, natural, and engaging practice, kids will build these skills over time until they become second nature. As you walk away from this training, remember this: you don't need a powerful plan. Just start with what's stalling progress. You don't need special materials. Just embed executive functioning practices into everyday play. And you don't need every parent to follow a strict program. Just give them simple ways to reinforce these skills at home. Because when we prioritize what matters, make it fun, and keep it natural, Kids don't just learn executive functioning skills, they use them in real life. Before we end, I want to go over some of the barriers and how you can overcome these. By now, you have a clear, structured approach to assessing, teaching, and generalizing executive functioning skills. You know how to embed them into natural routines, how to make them fun, and how to support families in the process. But let's be real, things don't always go smoothly. They almost never do. What happens when the child refuses to participate, or the parents don't follow through at home, or you don't have enough time to implement everything, or a child seems stuck and just isn't making progress? These aren't signs that the framework that I taught you isn't working. They're just part of the process and they have solutions. So let's talk about some of the most common barriers and how to troubleshoot them. The first one is that the child refuses to participate. You introduce an engaging, play-based executive functioning activity and the child ignores it. They say, I don't want to, or they refuse to even try. Some children resist anything that feels structured, especially if they have low frustration tolerance or struggle with flexibility. Other kids avoid tasks that challenge their weaknesses. If they struggle with planning, they avoid structured tasks. If they struggle with working memory, they avoid multi-step games. So here's how to overcome it. Embed executive functioning practices into their preferred activities. If they love trains, work on planning and organizing by having them build a long track before playing. If they love superheroes, work on impulse control with a freeze power game. If they love dinosaurs, work on task initiation with a dinosaur rescue mission. Let them have control over the game. Some kids resist tasks because they feel forced into them. You could try something like, should we do this as a race or in slow motion? Or you might ask, should I go first or do you want to? Giving choices makes them feel in control, reducing some of that pushback. Or you can make the challenge ridiculously easy at first. If they struggle with task initiation, start with something as simple as touch this block, then celebrate success. If they resist self-monitoring, make the first mistake so obvious it's funny. Put shoes on your hands, or success builds momentum. Once they feel successful, they're more likely to engage. The second barrier is that parents just aren't reinforcing the executive functioning skills at home. You've trained the parents, you give them the strategies, and then nothing changes. They say, I forgot, or I didn't have time. They won't do it for me like they do it for you. So most parents aren't intentionally ignoring your advice. They're just overwhelmed. They're busy. They're managing work, siblings, household responsibilities, and now we're asking them to add something new. So here's how you can overcome this barrier. You can make reinforcement of this and practice of this skill effortless. Instead of a structured home program, embed executive functioning practice into what they're already doing. When getting dressed, let them choose what goes on first. That requires some planning. At dinner, have them remember 3 items to bring to the table. That's practicing working memory. During playtime, let them be the boss and switch it up. And they can switch up the rules, and that requires cognitive flexibility. You can give them the 1-sentence strategy that we already kind of talked about. They don't have time to read long explanations. Just give them the strategy in 1 simple sentence. You can use video coaching instead of handouts. Most parents won't read a guide, but will watch a 30-second video showing them an example. Have them record their child at home and send it to you for quick feedback. And you can reinforce progress, not perfection. You can say things like, did you notice any moments where they caught their own mistakes today? Or what's something they handled better than last week? Small wins build confidence for both parents and kids. The third barrier is I don't have enough time to implement this. You have a full caseload. You're balancing IEPs, assessments, parent training, behavior management, and so much more. How do you fit executive functioning skill building into everything else that you're already doing? And here's how to overcome this. You can stop treating executive functioning like it's something extra. You're already working on flexibility, transitions, attention, behavior regulation. Executive functioning skills overlap with all of these. Instead of adding a new lesson, embed executive functioning skill building into what you're already doing. You can use the 2-minute executive functioning boost method. During every session, spend just 2 minutes on executive functioning skill practice. Let's do a 2-minute memory game before we start, if you're working on working memory. Or you can say, I'm going to change something in the room. Can you figure out what's different? And that can target cognitive flexibility. Before we do this activity, tell me your plan, and that can reinforce planning and organization. So you can see how it can be embedded into all of the other activities that are already going on in the child's skill acquisition plans. And you can prioritize based on what's blocking progress. If a child freezes before starting tasks, don't waste time on self-monitoring, target initiation first. If a child melts down when routines change, focus on cognitive flexibility before anything else. Pick one high impact skill at a time to maximize the results. That's also going to be reinforcing for you and the staff. The final barrier is that the child isn't making progress. You're following the framework, you're embedding executive functioning skill building into play, but the child isn't improving. This might happen if the goal is too big. Instead of targeting a skill like improve flexibility, try something like tolerates 2 switches between animals during the animal switch game. You can, maybe the challenge level might be too high for the activities that you're picking out. If they're always failing, they're not going to engage. You can start with something smaller and easier. And the child might need some more immediate feedback. Some kids don't notice their own progress, so make sure you're pointing it out. Whoa, you just remembered to wait to grab your back. Sorry about that. You might say something like, you just waited, remember to grab your backpack and put your shoes on. That's huge. The motivation and reinforcement that you're using might be off. Some kids need high interest rewards tied to executive functioning goals. Others just need to feel successful. And here's how to overcome that. You can shrink the goal until success happens. Start where they're already successful, so they're already starting by encountering reinforcement. If they can't wait 5 seconds, start with 1. If they can't tolerate a change in routine, start with a tiny change, such as switching seats. You might try tracking progress differently. Instead of expecting instant improvement, try measuring the intensity of the child's response or a slightly different aspect of the behavior. Maybe smaller meltdowns instead of bigger ones. Are they having less hesitation before starting a task? Are they making more attempts before giving up? And make sure to celebrate effort, not just success. You tried to take a deep breath before getting upset. That's amazing. Progress in executive functioning skills isn't instant, but with time, it builds into independence. Every child is different. Every family has their own challenges. Every session has limitations, but executive functioning skills can be taught, reinforced, and generalized as long as we keep it fun and natural, focus on what's blocking progress the most, and adapt the plan when something isn't working. And when we meet kids where they are, instead of what we expect them where we expect them to be, they surprise us every single time. And before we finish here today, I want to make sure that you have your final code word. That code word is natural. So again, the third code word is natural. Make sure you write it down. You need to enter this into the quiz in order to earn your certificate. And that wraps it up for today. I hope you walk away with the tools you need to elevate your parent training sessions around executive functioning skill building, and that you're able to start incorporating executive functioning skills into your treatment plans. If you're watching this for CEUs, you will need to complete the quiz for this course in the Mission Accomplished lesson. You will need to enter your BCBA number in the form. There is a brief survey in the form. Please take a minute to complete it and let me know what you thought of this course. It helps me improve the courses I'm offering. Thank you for joining me today. I will see you in the comments.